Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. I'm your host, Erik Isaacson, and with me, as always, is Danny Blue.
Hey, Erik.
I couldn't do the tagline that Justin says all the time. Hello, wonderful people. He does it so well that I just can't take it away from him.
He does. I've tried it a couple of times. My voice doesn't carry quite as well as his does, so it doesn't come off quite the same.
Today is going to be episode 193. We're going to be talking about build chains of modern web tools and tool chains, right? It's number 193, modern web tool chains.
Yeah. No, what we thought would be interesting to talk about this week is a couple of things, but one focus just generally on what are the tools that we're using, what do our current build pipelines and stuff look like now. Do we like them? Where do we think they could be better? And then, compare things to the way that they, maybe the way they used to be, maybe five years ago or so, which is, very, very different.
It's like ancient times in web development.
It is really crazy. Like if you do stop and think about if you've been doing web development for 5 years, think about where the environment, the ecosystem was 5 years ago versus where it is now, and it feels like longer than 5 years. I don't know if that's unique to web development. I do know that web stuff has been moving really rapidly, but I don't really know if that's like if I was a Java developer 5 years ago, do I feel like the ecosystem is vastly shifted in that amount of time? From some of the people I talk to, I don't think so, but please, if you're listening and you're a Java developer, please feel free to correct me. So Erik, do you just kind of want to start us off with when we say a build tool, or when we're talking about our development tool chain, kind of what we mean?
Yeah, I mean it's different for every team and every person. I think it's and it changes, like you said, over time. It changes a lot, and sometimes you don't notice those changes, but over time you'll notice, right? But I kind of think of it as when I think of web tool chains or toolkit changes, whatever you want to call them, so many different words. I think of like build tools, things like Webpack, Parcel, Rollup. Testing tools, like Jest and Jasmine or Karma, things like that. CI tools like Circle CI, any Jenkins integration type stuff.
Yeah.
Deploy tools is kind of like Docker type of builds, pushing things out to servers to do some automated system for infrastructure. Generators, I think of like not every team has generators, but generators are like templates basically that you just you have like there used to be the tool Yeoman. It's still around, but it's not used as much.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different generators.
Cool.
And scripts, like adding scripts in, like to do certain things that maybe your tool chain doesn't have. Or you're experimenting with something that's not available.
Yeah.
Is there anything else maybe that I missed when you think of that?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. Like I don't even think we'll get into like all of those things in super detail.
No.
We should actually try to do. I know we did an episode on Docker a long time ago. Like quite a while, years ago at this point. Yeah. I think we should actually probably revisit that at some point, because I don't know about you, and we can get into this more, but like I know that like we make really heavy use of Docker for a lot of stuff, to the point that it's one of the things that's become so ingrained that I'm like, I don't know how I did any of this before this.
Yeah, you're either using Docker usually or some serverless type of setup. AWS. I think for us, at least, where I am, AWS is really key with these tools.
Yeah, but let's go back. Let's kind of start at the beginning. And why don't you go first? Why don't you start with saying like what your current kind of build setup is? Like, what are you using to build? And like I said, we're going to be talking a lot about web or almost entirely about web. So we are the Web Platform Podcast after all.
Yes.
So, but what's the framework that you're using first? What are you using to build that framework? What are you using for testing? That kind of stuff. Why don't we start there?
So mostly at work, we're trying to consolidate a lot of tools over the past like year or so. So some of our tools are not as up to date as some people might have, but they're pretty modern. We have React for the front end, and so we're using Webpack in most applications to build out stuff because Webpack tends to have the most tooling for that type of tool, the most power, but it's not. It is an animal to wrestle with for sure. Like if it doesn't do what you want it to do right away,
Yeah.
you're going to be there for at least a few hours, if not days, trying to wrestle it.
Yeah, I feel like Webpack is pretty, like, I don't want to say synonymous with development stuff now because that might not be necessarily true, but I feel like for a lot of stuff, it's like step one for getting a lot of things set up. I mean, so I do a lot of Angular stuff, and Angular uses Webpack under the hood, but it abstracts it away so that you can't purposely. And we've also talked about that before, about why it does it that way, which I think is good. But even just a couple of days ago, we had to pull down a different. They're called builders in Angular. Had to pull down a different builder that would let us extend the Webpack config for something that we had to integrate with, like we had to do it. The guidance from the company was use Webpack and use these configurations, and we were like, crap. So that's what we did.
We have so much integration with other teams that it's like, okay,
yeah,
we have to be able to configure these things.
Yeah. Bam. So if you're using React, so for testing stuff, are you all using Jest?
So yeah, it's different in each group. Like some of us have kind of written our own type stuff, like our own little projects.
Yeah.
We have one guy over on another team. He created like a really lightweight framework for smaller apps that we use. But yeah, mostly Jest. And when we're doing React specific type testing, we add in some enzyme.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm building out like my own components, I've been using Parcel, but like I said in a previous episode, I'm gonna probably experiment with Rollup pretty soon.
Yeah.
I just like Parcel because it's so simple.
Yeah. So I actually tend to do the same thing. If I'm playing with something and I just need it up and running quickly, I also tend to be like, I'll just pull in Parcel. It's because I've never shipped any production code using Parcel as the thing that I'm going to use to generate my application, to create my builds. But for little stuff just getting up and running, it's pretty nice.
Yeah. One of the complexities we're using too is like nobody really writes straight JavaScript anymore here. So it's interesting. We'll have like either like we have some apps that have Babel, transpiler type tools.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most people do. Probably most of our audience knows, but for those of you who don't know, transpiler is basically something that takes JavaScript and makes it a little more manageable for the browsers so that it's a little more compatible. It has you can use the latest technology and then move it over. But most of us have migrated to TypeScript, which is pretty amazing. I do argue some cases where JavaScript is a little better, more flexible, but most cases, 90%, you're going to have TypeScript.
My absolute personal opinion is that TypeScript is absolutely the way to go. If you know JavaScript, you already know TypeScript. Plus, the type system in TypeScript is also just good. It's not that, this is just a JavaScript thing, so it's limited. The type system in TypeScript is really good, and it's really, really powerful. Like, I can't imagine doing a project without it at this point. I really can't. And I'm slowly convincing other people that is the case as well. It's the first time people fully grok generics in TypeScript. Do I start getting Sorry, I just got emails popped up and then everything got lost. But yeah, as soon as people grok generics, that's the first time where people are like, oh, this is one of the reasons it's really powerful. Which I think is really
It's
cool.
a great tool.
Oh, it's so
I
good.
think I like the interfaces. I like the typing, obviously. So TypeScript does add a few things on top of JavaScript that get
Yeah.
transpiled over to regular JavaScript.
Yeah.
I don't like that. For optimization for those type of tools, inevitably you're not going to be able to choose kind of how the browser sees your code. For if you wanted to optimize certain performance things or certain security things,
What do you
you
mean?
can. Because it's going to take if you do async, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to transpile it a certain way. It knows
Right.
how to push that in. But if you wanted to, manually do that so that the browser would have to parse this in this certain order or do that, you know what I mean? Like very minor edge
Oh,
cases.
okay. Yeah.
It's not like you would need that often, but
Yeah.
it is nice to have that flexibility.
Well, and it's also depending on what you're doing. So, like, I know, for example, for our node projects, so talking about toolchain, so we use TypeScript a lot. And for a lot of our node projects now, so we have some internal tools that are built in Node that are all written in TypeScript, and other just Node things that we do in TypeScript. A lot of times we don't. The only build tool we use is TypeScript, is the TypeScript compiler. There's no other task runner that's running in the background to pull things in. We literally just compile the TypeScript files in line. So you get your source file, and then spit out next to it, you get your JavaScript file, your map file, all that kind of stuff. And then you just run it. It compiles. We don't transpile down to ES5 for Node stuff because we don't have to.
Right.
And that's it. That's all you have to do. If you start getting a larger thing, you can maybe use something like TS Node to do it in memory, and use that in conjunction with like NodeMon. But in general, we don't pull that stuff in until we need it. It's actually one of the big differences I see from previous stuff is you can just use here's one tool, it does the thing, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, TS Node is basically TypeScript node, so that you can write TypeScript and then run it in the command line or whatever through that.
So what it does is it does the compile step in memory. So rather than spitting out source files, you can just run and instead of Node, just replace the command with TS Node and point it at a TypeScript file instead. Wouldn't do that for production necessarily. I mean, maybe there are use cases where it would be okay if it's some kind of tool or something, but in general, it's for development just so it integrates a bit easier. Tools like NodeMon that people are probably familiar with that will restart your Node servers or whatever you're doing will rerun your program when changes happen. You can configure that with TS Node as well.
It's a daemon like PM2 or forever.
Yeah. But even that, but like I said, even that kind of stuff we don't reach for by default anymore, because we just don't have to. And we've had some situations that we've actually had much better luck just using the compiler directly. Or if you want to get real crazy, the compiler API and building your script around that.
You are too smart for me. Having that can be fun actually, but
yeah.
So when you say that's the only tool that you use in some projects, I know with React it's not. It's very different than it is with Angular. Angular is very much like sort of like the Rails way, where it's just, hey, this is the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
Use it this way, right? Here's all the tools that you'll need.
Yeah.
And if you need something else, then we have modules for that or something you can use, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much.
With React though, if we're using TypeScript and we have a server-side rendered app, or we have PWA, the Webpack config can be at odds with itself, and things can break back and forth, and it's really a hassle.
Well, so one of the things too and this is one of the reasons that I like that Webpack is abstracted away, because Webpack is very good at what it does. It's very, very good. It's well done. A lot of really smart people behind it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but what ends up happening is that the thing that doesn't get tested is your Webpack config. it gets tested, and it can become complicated enough that it almost needs to be, because you need to know, because unfortunately what happens is you don't know that it's broken until your builds are broken, because the X, Y, or Z thing didn't work correctly. You know what I mean? So yeah, like it is really good. The only other thing that I don't like about exposing Webpack is I don't like all of the loaders that get used.
Yeah.
Because I have, and this is not to say that if you use a bunch of fancy loaders to do various things that there's anything wrong with that. There's not. I personally don't like it because it can create this gap where folks don't understand what the web platform underneath is doing versus what Webpack is doing. And you see this a lot with certain types of like I'm trying to think of a good example of one. Like when you use the way that you import CSS, for example, and you're like, I want to use the Sass loader, and I can just say import SCSS.
Mm-hmm.
I have run into situations where I've had to explain, if there's maybe a project where we did not use Sass or something, or we didn't use Webpack or something, having to explain. It's like the browser doesn't do that. The browser can't do that. It doesn't know what that means. Webpack takes it and turns it into something that the browser can understand, which again is good. And that's one of the reasons it's really powerful, that you can chain all these things together, but it creates this gap. I mean, and that might sound really silly coming from me when I'm talking about use the Angular CLI and it just does all the tools. You don't have to think about it. But when you do end up with a lot of these different loaders for things that look like they would be standard things, it can cause some confusion. In my experience, I could be completely wrong.
Okay, and Webpack loaders are what, for those who don't know?
Okay, yeah. So a Webpack loader is pretty much now, and also for Webpack experts, if I mix up something about loaders and plugins, please don't shoot me. Correct me, but don't shoot me. So a Webpack loader is how you would, for example, use TypeScript. So if you want to use TypeScript through Webpack, what you do is that you configure Webpack to say, all right, look in all of my source files for files with the .ts extension, and when you are importing them, I want you to run this loader over it, and then a loader can do various other things. But for example, it's how I think TypeScript is a good example. I think using something like Lesser Sass is a good example. So something like TypeScript might seem quite a bit closer because it's like, okay, it's turning the TypeScript into JavaScript. What ends up getting weird is when people want to import other file types that aren't that don't fall into that. Like I've seen some for importing readmes directly and that kind of thing, or directly importing
one,
yeah, and you can do a lot of really cool stuff with that. Again, I'm not saying don't do it at all. It's a really cool thing, but a lot of times, especially with the newer module stuff, Webpack is the only way that people have been exposed to to JavaScript modules, the only way. And so then if you were to go, and so as we're going into a world where JavaScript modules are natively supported, and actually if we look at the browser, Can I Use or something, are really well supported.
Even dynamic imports are very well supported.
I think
really
it's
surprising to me.
Yeah, I think it's probably if you're not sure, go look at Can I Use or something. I almost guarantee that the support is better than what you think it is. It's pretty much it's just IE 11 is the only thing that doesn't support it, and we have ways around that. Lost my train of thought. But yeah, so that's what a loader is, and that's the type of thing that it lets you do.
Okay. And a plugin compared to a loader is a plugin.
Honestly, I'm not even 100% sure.
I don't know how it's explained either. So let's look it up. So
you look it up, right? Okay. Well, while you're looking that up, this actually reminded me of one other thing. So this is a thing in my current tool chain on the Angular side that I really, really like, and it's a newer feature in the CLI version 8. Mm-hmm. Which is differential loading. This ties into the module thing for this way. So because the modules system is so widely supported, what you can do, it's almost like, I'm trying to think of another another example. But ultimately what you can do is you can use that module like tag that or attribute that the script tag has to let the browser choose which bundle of code it's going to import.
Right.
So pretty much what happens is you can be like, all right, so it's this. So here's a script tag. Here's all of the code. And then you can conditionally import, but you're like, here is the, for example, if you're shipping to Chrome, Firefox, Safari, you can ship mostly just ES6 code. Yes, ES 2015 plus. You can ship
synchronous modules. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the module syntax will, now I will say with the CLI that the module syntax, it doesn't use the native module stuff. It still uses like Angular's way of loading in things and that kind of stuff. It still does do that as far as I know. But things like it doesn't need to transpile classes into functions to constructor functions with prototypes. Maybe even async await. It doesn't need to do. But the point is there are various things that it can ship to the browser with fewer polyfills, really no polyfills, and less code because doesn't have to be transpiled. But then for IE 11, and I think it's fair to say that IE 11 for most people is like the minimum target that you try to hit. I'm sure I know that there are people that need to target IE 10, maybe even IE 9, depending on the thing, but IE 11 is the big one. And so with that, you can ship stuff that works in IE 11, still works pretty well in IE 11, but it works better in modern browsers. So you don't actually lose anything. You just get better experience by using a modern browser and the same experience that you were expecting if you're using IE. So that's one of my favorite kind of new things that the toolchain that, like in the most recent, like the past several months that the toolchain has given us. Builds can take a little bit of a long time. I think they've done some things to help speed that up because pretty much it has to create two bundles. It has to create like an ES5 one and an ES 2015 one.
There's so much complexity that can be reduced and code that can be removed just by not supporting IE11. But like we get enough revenue from the small traffic we have that we do need to keep it around, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting though is most of our traffic and our money comes from mobile. I can't give exact numbers, obviously, but it's interesting to see that. And then IE11 is still an issue.
Yeah.
So
we have, as a lot of folks have learned over the past, quite a few years, pretty much since mobile phones have become what they are. Like people don't even call them smartphones. Like, do people even still say smartphones? They're just phones now, right?
Yeah. My parents,
they call them smartphones. But they're just phones now. A lot of times that's the way that people access the internet. It's not through it's not through any sort of desktop. They have a tablet and a phone, and that is how they access the internet. So some of that stuff is interesting, and some of that does impact some of the toolchain decisions because on mobile it's more important. I'm not going to go into a whole bundle size discussion thing, but the thing that nobody can decline is that if your bundle is smaller, it will load faster, especially on mobile because JavaScript is expensive. Which that's fine. That's all I'm going to say about it. Not going to get too much into it, but that is true. So that affects some of the stuff that you want to do, like the differential loading, where it's important. Like I know there have been issues with people that they load polyfills into browsers that don't need them, which is one of the reasons I think that the Angular's stance on it is a good one, where it's like we're just going to handle it for you. There's like if you look it up, there's an old issue on in the Angular CLI listed in the issues on GitHub that I started actually about conditionally loading polyfills. This was way before the module syntax would enable us to kind of use that as a feature flag to detect it. But even before then, like there are tools like polyfill.io that you can load on and you can say like these are the browsers that I need to support. And then the first thing that your browser does is it goes to this, it's just a script tag pointing to this place with a bunch of query parameters, and it will load in just the polyfills you need. I think it even does does user agent sniffing to be like, if you're on IE11, these are the things you need, or you can target specific things.
Most of them do a combination of that and object detection.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a tool even before that we used to use called Modernizer. I don't know if you know
Oh
that.
yeah. But was that conditional? Like, would that only load things into the browser if it was needed?
I don't remember it being conditional.
Okay.
Honestly, but it was the first place I saw that had like a compiled list of things you could use. And I'm sure there was other tools for that, but that was the first one I saw. Just wrap it around again. According to the Webpack documentation, okay, the going back to loaders versus
plugins.
Yeah, plugins are the backbone of Webpack according to them, and they serve the purpose of doing anything else. This is from the documentation that a loader cannot do. So a Webpack plugin is a JavaScript object that has an apply method. This apply method is called by the Webpack compiler, giving it access to the entire compilation lifecycle.
Okay.
So basically, if you want to mess with Webpack,
plugins are the way to go. Okay.
So just be wary of that when you install random plugins, people.
Yeah.
All right.
That's interesting. Okay. Like I said, I wasn't really sure because. So I think sometimes they seem to be treated
Webpack all the time, and I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
So we went through some of that. So how is it? We started to go through like Polyfill IO, Modernizer.
Oh yeah.
How has the toolchain changed for you, Danny?
Oh,
I've known you for at least 5 years.
Yeah. How has it changed? I mean, so for me, it went from no toolchain of any kind, which I know some people yearn for. It's like, oh, back when it was just this, but that was bad. It was bad then. Like people, I think sometimes, oftentimes see the past with rose-colored glasses. It was bad. There was a bunch of problems. You could. This is not and it says say anything that like what we have now is perfect and good and doesn't need to change at all. But like when I first started, like I mean, if you want to talk about parts of the tool chain, like Git, like the first job that I had we didn't use version control. So like that. So like
it's again, more common than you think.
Yeah. So. So no Git, SVN, or anything like that. And then my next job after that is where I started to get exposed to those things. So like that was the first time we used SV. I used any sort of version control, which was SVN. Started just being from like I wasn't really familiar with compiled languages or anything at that point. So, but it's a .NET project was the thing that I was working on. So I learned a little bit about how that worked. And then even just we had some tools that we ran for CSS minification. So like that, and that's how it started. But none of it was none of it was automatic. Like you had to run it by hand. Not like today we have our Bitbucket server that's hooked up to our Jenkins account. As soon as you submit a pull request, it kicks off a test build and the status is reported back to Bitbucket, and you can't merge if the build fails. That kind of stuff. That like I didn't even know that was a thing. Or that was a way that people would do stuff. Like we didn't submit pull requests.
I mean, today now we have all these analysis tools that we can plug in. Like Webpack has an analyzer.
Oh yeah,
a visualizer for the analyzer.
The bundle analyzer.
Yeah. So it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. But again, overall, I think it's better. But yeah, so like, and I'm trying to think where it went after that, because we did go through this period, like after in the grunt and the gulp days.
Mm-hmm. And what are those?
All right, so grunt and gulp are both. I'm going to call them task runners.
Yeah,
I think that's about as good of a way. But they're node tools that let you configure things like using grunt was the first time that I saw I made a change and the browser refreshed on its own. Stuff like that. but it'd be like, watch these files. When these files change, run this plugin or just run this code to do something. So that would be another way to change, like, so if you had SAS, you needed to compile into CSS, watch all that SAS files. As soon as they change, turn them into plain old CSS files into some dist folder somewhere.
Right.
And so those were good. Those were actually good. Gulp is still good. I like Gulp still. There are cases, like I'm working on a project with Drupal right now, and we have some things that we want to handle, and I think Gulp might be the way to handle it.
If you like doing imperative code, it can be a lot nicer. Gulp basically, when Gulp came around and Grunt, you were using Grunt for everything because Grunt had all of the things. When Gulp came around, you could do piping and streams through it.
Yeah.
Because that's the basis of the whole tool. And so you could just pass stuff to the next thing, to the next thing. So
yeah, it's actually really weird. Grunt was really popular. And then people were like, well, I just end up with these enormous configuration files and it's hard to manage and all that kind of stuff. And then we went to Gulp, where it's like, okay, it's not really configuration, it's just code. So you write code to do things. So you get an input, run a function, and then you return the output. And that was the best thing. And then and that was one of the things that people really liked about it, and one of the things that I like about it. But then we went, I feel like, at least me, my next jump after Gulp was to Webpack, which was back to just giant configuration files. And for a while, I was really confused. Now, they're very different. Let's be clear. They're very different. But from just looking at them from the outside, I was like, oh, why? I thought we were done with this. I didn't think we had to do this anymore. But and then obviously, obviously Webpack has legs. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. At some point, it'll probably get usurped by something, or honestly, maybe it'll get usurped by nothing. You know what I mean? It'll just be like, oh, I have to do less things with it. So it's still around for some stuff, but I just don't need it for as many things.
Yeah, when you don't have a tool set, you start appreciating a tool set. When you have a tool set, you start wishing you didn't have one.
Yeah, when it breaks, that's always the thing, is when it breaks, which again is a challenge with some of these tool chains, just in general, when they have so many moving parts that you manage. So if you're running your own Webpack config, and you're like, all right, here's my production one, here's my dev one. These are the plugins I need for this. This version of a plugin got updated, and then you end up with a lot of dependency issues, which is not a Webpack problem, but is a problem that I think often that shows its face when you have really complicated Webpack stuff, which is, again, one of the reasons that I appreciate that the Angular CLI hides it, so I don't have to think about it. It's entirely because I'm lazy.
Well, also too, if you need stuff passed to you from a server if you need environment type stuff, environment variable passed to you, and when you do the build, you may not be able to account for that without a plugin, right? So
that
you might have to define your own.
I'm actually very curious what you think. So, and I actually should have used this as my example about people using Webpack and then kind of not fully being mistaken about when things are available, what things are actually available to plugins. Environment variables are one of them, because you can use the Webpack, I don't know what it's called, but it's you might even do a custom plugin, but whatever it is, so that you can do, process.env. some environment variable in your front end code. And then you pass those variables in when you generate your build, and then Webpack passes them down. It's a really nice system, and I actually think a really good example of a non-standard thing that Webpack makes really easy, because it's something that people need, oftentimes people need to do. But then if you run into a project that doesn't use Webpack, you're like, how do I use environment variables? We're like, well, really, you don't, because you have globals. That's kind of what you would use as an environment variable in that, hopefully namespace in some way. But that's pretty much what you do. It's all process.env is, at the end of the day, is just a global object that's available. So that is an interest. That's, like I said, I think that's it. Both an example of a really good thing that Webpack lets you do that solves a big problem, but at the same time can cause confusion as soon as you have to step away from Webpack.
Yeah, and I know we're talking a lot about Webpack, but it's the tool I've been using most recently.
I mean, and I would argue like it runs an enormous number of projects, and it's central to a lot of things. Is the project I'm on right now, actually, I actually have very little tooling, like just like my Jenkins pipeline and stuff, because it's a Drupal project, which I will say I am reminded that I don't like PHP. It's fine, but I don't like it. But where it is, sometimes it's kind of nice. It's like, how do we deploy the Drupal application? It's like, well, you just SCP the files over there. Same way with just vanilla JavaScript. How do you deploy changes? Just SSH in, copy the files, restart the server. That's it. You're done. There's nothing else.
I remember using FTP back in the day to deploy. Now we have a lot of tools like with the Amazon SDK and other things, but I remember you had to like, all right, I'm going to copy my files into this folder, and then I'm going to push that folder with the FTP up to this other folder on a server. It was oh my god, it was horrible.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like that's even how dev servers, like before, like another thing I don't think we've talked about yet when it comes to tool chains is running things locally, having a local web server to host. Let's like on top of everything else. We haven't even like I said, this, not even touching on Docker or anything like that, but just the ability to run your code locally, to have a local database, to be like, this is how it's going to behave. Again, like my first job is a good bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a good bit of PHP. We just had a dev environment, and it was a very small team. Let's be clear. So only one person would be working on it at a time. And you would just have to FTP if you wanted to change, you would just have to make your change and then FTP it up to the server. And that's how it would work. So that's one. Yeah. So that I will say that's one piece that is 100% better. Now, and of course, I'm sure at the time people were like, oh, they had these things back then. I'm sure they did. I didn't know about them.
I mean, how can you know everything?
Yeah.
Like, seriously. Like we that brings up a great point though, because for consistency, right? I mean, we have stuff now like lock files in our package management. If you're using Node, you're using npm to
we haven't even talked about package managers.
Right. We'll save that for another one. That could be a whole episode. Yeah. But basically, like one thing that we ran into was if you want consistent builds, build it on the server that you're going to run it, right?
Yeah.
So like there's certain cases. If you run it locally, you might have different things happening. There could be some variation. Hopefully with the lock file that fixes a lot of it. But what we ended up doing for some things was, all right, let's use Docker, and Docker will have Docker in there, and we'll npm install and build assets and send them to the CI within the CI.
Yeah.
So like it's really interesting, very cool and consistent.
Yeah.
But it's also a lot of work to figure out.
It is more stuff to know. Again, real quick, get like just like a sentence. What is Docker?
So Docker is a container system, right? Or it's a set of containers. I don't know how you would define that. Like sort of like a virtual machine, but not.
Okay. I think that's fine, but it has become an enormous benefit for us. So we use Jenkins. If you use Jenkins file, depending on how you have Jenkins configured, and it's the same with Circle CI and other stuff as well, you can just say, here's a Docker file that defines what the environment is.
And these are continuous integration tools, just so.
Yeah. So for example, you can have, like I said, your build file and be like, okay, it's going to be this version of Node that's going to have these things pre-installed on it, and that's what's going to be the thing that we're going to use to build. And then at the same time, when you're deploying, it's the same thing. You can be like, here is the environment, and then I am defining in code that defines what environment this is running in. And so when you talk about consistency, if you want to promote from like dev to staging to production, if you're using a Docker container, you're running the same. You on all of your, say you just have 3 boxes, you install Docker on each of them. After your dev build passes, whatever, you can just take that same container, like maybe, pass in some configuration stuff, and then you just deploy the exact same container in a different environment, and you can be pretty confident it's going to work the same way. Like, obviously there's always things that can go wrong. The machines can have the wrong ports exposed or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There can always be problems, but like that one thing you don't have to worry about as much. And God, it is a good, like, I have not had to troubleshoot an issue of a difference between environments that wasn't like data related in a long time since Docker.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of complexities with Docker in itself, but
yes, as a Docker,
it is a great tool. I love Docker. It's great. We use it now to do deployments with AWS.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great. We're also on our own. We still have our own legacy infrastructure as well. So maintaining two different systems, there is a lot of tooling that gets kind of messed up and screwed over in certain ways. So we're moving away towards just all AWS. But it's
awesome.
interesting.
So actually, we're
close to time. Yeah,
we're starting to run out of time. So I guess the thing that I think would be nice to end on is, what is something that you think, what's something that you would like to see improved about? So we talked about, like the differences, like kind of where we are now, a little bit about where we were, like where do you want to see, like specifically for web, where do you want to see these tool chains go? Like what, like, are there any tools that you hope go away? Are there still problems that we think would be solved with other tools or improvement to existing ones, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would like tools to get out of my way, mostly. I mean, that they're there to help you to avoid certain things, but they can get in the way, like where you're actually not coding. You're just building out these tools and making them better.
Yeah. The number one thing for me is CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and we're continuing to get better.
Yeah.
But like Circle CI, like if anybody that's used Jenkins, some people love Jenkins, some people hate it. I do really like it, but I also fully admit what it is, and it's tough. So like we've actually built some tools around helping people get Jenkins to work. So like we have our own tools to kind of be like, you need to stand up a Jenkins job, run this command, it'll set everything up for you, connect everything. Leon and I actually recorded a podcast episode about that a while ago that we have sitting in the wings that we haven't released yet. So I need to dig that up, and I'll probably release that one after this one.
Very cool.
But that type of thing is still a challenge for some folks. It's getting a lot better with things like Firebase, with Circle CI, with now like the Google, what do they call them? Google Actions? Is that what they're called? No.
I'm not familiar.
GitHub Actions, not Google Actions, GitHub Actions.
Okay.
So, so these things are starting to get better. And like a lot of like out of the box Git systems have some sort of CI built into them. Like if you use GitLab, it has CI built into it. There's some sort of CI. I've not used it before, but I've heard pretty good things about it. So I would just like to see that story get a little bit better. And it usually ends up being something annoying, like figuring out certificates and that kind of stuff. And so again, we're so far ahead of where we were before, but I think it seems there's still some room for improvement there, especially for like if you want to actually run like production stuff, if it's not just, like I said, and I could be wrong, could be mistaken, maybe we're further along than we thought, but like things like access management, managing secrets and that kind of stuff is still like you still need
pretty bad in the tool chains right now.
You still need people that really, really know this stuff. Like you need true experts in a lot of this stuff, depending on exactly what your field is. And I feel like and again, maybe there's not. Maybe this is kind of, like for some things, this is as good as it's going to get for good reasons. But like, it can be a very frustrating part of the process. Right?
There's not a lot of space in the tool chains either for performance specific tools, or there's SiteSpeed.io that you can put in, but like a lot of it right now is manual testing.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting.
So like, I know there's some
and security too. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Like, I know you can use some things like Lighthouse has a CLI you can use.
Yeah, there's a few.
Budget stuff is making its way into tools. Like I know in Webpack you can get a performance budget out to be like, okay, my main bundle can't be more than this size because I know that users will start seeing a degradation in performance if it gets bigger than this.
Well, there's a lot of metrics that Google uses too, so it's hard to kind of pick. What do you know? Lighthouse covers most of them, I have to say.
I feel like Lighthouse is a really good start for a lot of things. Like, it's not the be all end all. Don't fight to get 100, like a score of 100 on Lighthouse. Getting a score of 100 on Lighthouse doesn't necessarily mean that you're bulletproof. It's the same thing with like unit test coverage or something like that, right? It's like, you want 100% test coverage. I'll give you 100% test coverage. Might not be very good, but it'll be there.
Also, remember too that Google is notorious for changing what they really consider in their algorithm.
Yeah.
So if you're like saying, all right, TTI, I'm not gonna, which is time to first interactive, I'm not gonna worry about that.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna worry about the first input delay,
time to first paint, time to interactive. If you look at if you look at the scores for Lighthouse or the way it's done, and one is because there are people that care about this stuff and are working to make tools like that better, but like, it's different. Like, the scores that you used to get before are different than the scores you would get now for the same thing.
Absolutely.
But again, good places to start. Same thing with like accessibility tools, like static analysis tools to help you with accessibility stuff. It's not going to get you 100% of the way there, but it will help you. It's almost not that it helps you. Just the accessibility tool, for example, it's not that the tool helps you get to a fully accessible site. It helps you from making really simple mistakes, like missing alt tags. Like, that's a really, really common one. That's a really easy thing to catch with a tool.
Yeah.
Be like, here's an image tag. There's no alt. Add an alt. It won't make sure that the alt is good and descriptive of the image that you're actually displaying, but it's something. Tools
should be like your assistants.
Yeah.
They should be like, hey, I'm going to help you out and take care of this little thing for you.
Yeah. I know sometimes they can be frustrating. I use TypeScript with all of the strict options on, and every once in a while I'd be like, I just keep finding the compiler errors. It's like, well, it's telling you, but it's like, yeah, but like strict null checks, for example, it's like, this function potentially returns undefined or null, and you're not doing any sort of null check.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's telling you that now rather than 2 weeks from now when a bug gets found. So it's like you said, it's like, if a tool's not helping you, you shouldn't use it. But hopefully they are helping you.
Yeah. And in the future, hopefully, we'll need less and we'll be able to use different ones. Something new comes along. Because if you look back, when I started doing this, we were doing, PHP, JSPs, and then you had JavaScript in there a little bit, and you were basically doing server-side rendering like we do now, just less complicated, right? So it's like, it's interesting how it's changed and turned around.
Yep.
So hopefully we'll be seeing these tools used differently.
Awesome.
I think that's it. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Danny? Any last parting words for our listeners?
No, I'm reiterate what I said just a minute ago and coming off of what you said. Tools should be your assistants. And if a tool is not helping you, then there's not really a reason to use it, whether that be a linter, your compiler, whatever it is.
Words of wisdom. All right. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Eric.
In episode 193, Modern Web Toolchains. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everybody.